back to the other screen.
Go back.
Well, I was just going to say start out the recording with that, but it's okay.
Well,
You already
now I
advanced.
can go forward.
Already advanced. So, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, July 8th, to our Widget World Wednesday. Chris is going to mute everyone, and we are recording. Today, we're going to talk about everything relaxed Roman shades. But if you have any other questions, I guess a reminder, just you can pop your questions into the chat box, and we'll either stop or Chris will have me stop and we'll answer a few questions if they seem time sensitive. Otherwise, we'll circle back around at the end of the presentation and go through whatever questions are there. If it's not related to relaxed Roman shade, you're welcome to still put your questions in there. And I think we're just going to get started. So welcome everyone, and we're glad you're here. So this is an Advanced Education Wednesday, Relaxed Romans, and I'm hoping that people have had a chance to look at the tutorial that was published on YouTube about 6 weeks ago. And I think it was around Memorial Day weekend when that series was publishing. And I guess I'm wondering who here has followed that series and how many of you actually have been able to make a relaxed Roman shade since the series was published. Anyone? You can just kind of raise your hand or something. Otherwise, I'll proceed. I know there's a lot of interest in relaxed Roman shades. So our agenda today is taking you through the building of a relaxed Roman shade. We're going to discuss other methods, and then, like I said, we'll do the Q&A. What I'm taking you through is basically our YouTube series step by step. I'm not going to read all the steps, but I'm going to sort of skim through and maybe give you the highlights of each step as we go. So you can, as always, when we publish different shade styles series on YouTube, we have the companion PDF sitting on our website, which is centurionrs.com. So you can print out that step-by-step, excuse me, step-by-step PDF, and each step corresponds to each step in the series. So the basic flat Roman shade had 12 steps in it. It looks like this this relaxed Roman has 9 steps. I just did the top down bottom up. That actually had 8 steps in it. And sometimes with each shade, I try and add in a couple other features that you may or may not choose to be in your shades. So you can omit some of the steps if you're not like adding banding or doing a concealed hem grip or ribs, and black outlining is in the top down bottom up. So you can sort of skip and mix and match some of those features from other series to go into whatever shade you're making that day. So, I always start out each series with the number one question that we get, and we still get this question every week, multiple times from people before they place their order for their widget kits. They always want to know how many cords does their shade need, and they'll give us the dimensions. They'll give us, they'll usually just give us the dimensions, which I always throw it back to the workroom. It's up to the workroom to consider how many lift cords you need, because we don't have the fabrics in front of us, and we also don't know what your fabrication method is going to be, whether or not you're going to be using ribs or anything like that. So with the relaxed Roman shade, it's a similar question. We can, we can't answer too many of the specifics on how many lift cords you need, although I will say with a relaxed Roman, it's actually much more straightforward, because with one swoop, you only need 2 lift cords. If you want 2 swoops, then you would get a 3-cord widget kit. And with a 4-cord, you can get 3 swoops out of that. So our sort of our joke or our smart remark when people ask how many lift cords a basic flat Roman shade needs is we can say, you know, you can use 2 or you can use 3 or you can use 4. It depends on whether or not you want a relaxed look. So we also recommend here, I take you through drawing to scale. So I'm going to keep talking about this using graph paper and using a gridded graph paper where the scale of your grid is generally for me, I either work, if I'm working on a small shade, then 1 square might equal 1 inch. And if I'm working on a larger scale shade, then often 1 square equals 4 inches. And I generally try and find, it's getting harder and harder, but I try and find graph paper that has 4 squares to an inch. I don't know that it really matters, but it used to be something that I found helpful when I was sketching things out and then translating those measurements to my work table. It just helped to have something that, for some reason, 1s and 4s with a grid seemed to always sort of mathematically work out because we're usually working in feet and yards. So that's a number that's kind of easily divisible by 4. Um, so so here in the first video with the cord, you can see how the different cord sizes will give you a different result. And I found this kind of by accident because I was asked to make a 94-inch relaxed Roman shade, and the designer wanted it to be fixed. She didn't need it to be operable. It was in a nice sheer linen-y type fabric, and I said, you know, I think I can make it operable. So I made it operable, and I'm glad I did. I had one that was a single width or a single swoop, and then I had this one 94-inch long one that was 3 swoops. And what was interesting is that this was for a designer, and she ended up photographing the space, and I could tell in the photographs that they raised and lowered those shades depending on what they wanted the look of the photograph to be or how much light, natural light they wanted coming in the window. So I always say, you know, even if it's a relaxed Roman, you get a request for a relaxed Roman, and the designer says it doesn't need to move, knowing that you can use a widget and economically and fairly easily, your fabrication method's going to be virtually the same, whether it's fixed or not. And once it's on a widget, then at install, the designer, the client, they can operate that shade however they want. And there may be times, seasons where the homeowner wants to really clean the window and get the shade up out of the way just for cleaning seasonally. So I always say, you know, if you can make it functional, then just add a widget, and I think everyone will be happier all the way around. So, yep, and we talk about weight not really being so much of an issue. Chris, do you want to make sure everyone's muted? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Um, so the second step is we go right into cutting the face and the lining fabrics. So you've already determined your ideally you've drawn your sketch on your graph paper and you've figured out the proportions, and you're going to need to determine how much that permanent swoop is going to be. So whether the designer sends you a sketch, which if I'm working with a designer, I really kind of force them to give me a sketch, and I try and get them to do it on graph paper, on a gridded graph paper, just so that you know, do they want a shallow swoop or do they want something more dramatic? And I always use a beaded weight chain and I can just use the side of my table where I've got the ruler going down the side, and I can determine with my beaded weight chain what that flare or that, excuse me, the extra length or width there at that bottom is going to be for that swoop. So when I do my relaxed Roman shades, because I like them to be functional, I'll direct you to Instagram. I have two different videos, and I talk about the different profiles you could have for your relaxed Roman shade. Because it's functional, I like to have it straight coming down the sides and the permanent swoops at the bottom. And then I talk you through doing the alternate shape is a trapezoid. So that's up to you to sort of determine. And I think it's in the first video where we're talking about how many lift cords and all that. I talk you through the different shape profiles and what you can use. And in our Instagram, I do have two videos, and we'll probably put those on YouTube, isolate them, and put them into a YouTube video in our single thread playlist where I show you the two different silhouettes you can use. But what I take you through today and what I take you through on YouTube is one version, and then there's different options that you can pick and choose depending on the end result that you want for your shade. So, like I said, you need to determine what that swoop is going to be. And I suggest you have a visual in front of you so that you know what that swoop is going to be. Otherwise, you're just kind of guessing, and you don't want to get to installation and find out that it really doesn't look good if it's too much, or maybe the designer wanted it to be a little bit more pronounced and you went on the shallow side. Okay. So when you cut, I'm not going to go through all of these numbers, but I kind of give you some formulas based on some of the standards that I have started using when I make my Roman shades. So it's about having sort of the 6 inches to wrap. I fully wrap a 1x2 around with extra face fabric. If that's not something that you want to do, then you can change these formulas to match how your fabrication style is. But if you want, just for the sake of doing a sample shade, I always recommend just go through our formula, see how it is, and if there are things that you need to tweak, then go, right there on your printouts, you can adjust the formulas to be your standards. And in this shade that I'm doing, there are two different ways that I talk about finishing the relaxed Roman shade. And one is the typical where you do turn side hems. And in the series, I'm doing a pillowcasing method because we're inserting flat trim. So that's where you might diverge in your fabrication and say, well, I'm not using flat trim, so I'm just going to do turn side hems. So you'll have to sort of swap that fabrication step out when it comes to it. But I will say, I think I'm a convert now and probably going to think about doing all of my relaxed Roman shades in a pillowcase method. Whether or not it has flat trim inserted or not, I think that it's actually reduces bulk on the sides, and I just think I found it to be a really nice, clean look when I was done. So it's probably something that I'm going to make my standard. If I get a call for a relaxed Roman shade, that it's going to be my standard, and I won't do turn side hems unless I absolutely have to have something that isn't pillowcased, I guess. So, but I think you should decide which look you like, and it's easy to make up a small sample. You don't even have to rig that totally up on a widget to see which style you prefer. But if you haven't done a pillowcased relaxed room in, I highly suggest it. You could even just use a very narrow micro welt or something like that in the corner that coordinates with your fabric. It would just help keep all the face fabric on the front and the lining fabrics to the back. But the flat trim that I talk about, which I do say is optional, it's a really nice tailored detail. It's a way that you can add an upcharge. It's not drastically different, and it actually has a little bit more fudge room in how the shade finishes out, because you end up with that half-inch trim on either side, and then you've got basically a narrow seam allowance on the inside. So I just found it to be a nice look at the end. So you're cutting out, yep, this is still cut step 2, where you're cutting things out. So I'm not going to go into any of these steps here. Like I said, this is all just pulled straight from our PDF, so you don't need to take copious notes on this. If you go to our website and print out the PDF instructions for the relax shade, you're going to have all this text in there step by step. So just relax. Don't worry about all this text. I'm just going to kind of skim through and try and pull out what I think is worth talking about with each step as we go along. So this is going to be step 3. You're going to be stitching the 3 sides, turning things out. You really get into making this shade quite quickly. I will say that if you haven't done that flat trim, take time to sort of get your head around that, because it is kind of tricky with the math. But if you're just going to insert a small trim, then it's no different than just doing a little pillowcase, pillow or any of that for the formula. So you're going to turn everything out, you're going to press it. And here's where I say the optional fabrication, if you're not pillowcasing it, is where you're going to do the turned side hems. Yeah, and then you're gonna have, they're gonna have a turned a bottom hem, and this is why I really like the pillowcasing in this style, because if you do turned up side hems, you're always gonna have sort of that bottom hem that's going to be kind of chunky, and sometimes that bottom hem ends up becoming a weird swoop, or I don't even know what to call it. It just sometimes it doesn't look intentional. It kind of looks like a drop hem. If you've done a bunch of these before with just doing side hems, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Where people are never quite sure, should I tuck up, the bottom edge of that bottom hem or not. And I also think from the back, doing the turn side hems with the double bottom hem, it kind of looks a little bit more strange too, just because you're gonna have a couple inches on the back side of your face fabric showing. Whereas when you pillowcase, you don't really get any of the face fabric showing from the back. You have your little trim that you'll see, and it'll all just be lining from the back side. So especially if it's in a window where, there's a patio or a front porch or something like that, I think pillowcasing is a clean look. So, but I do tell you here how you can do it. So if you're looking at the shade that's on my stand, that's the one. It was sheer and unlined, and so that one just had turned side hems. So you can kind of see how that goes, and you can kind of see at that bottom where I'm talking about, where the bottom hem actually just, sometimes it folds forward, sometimes you want to actually break it in half so that there's a swoop in it. It's always just a little awkward with a turned side hem. And I know that some people even make that bottom hem, they'll just do a double 2-inch to sort of eliminate some of the bulk. So you could certainly do that. So at this point, step 4, we are measuring and marking for the tack points. We've done all the calculation, ideally on graph paper ahead of time. So all you're doing is transferring those marks to your shade after it's all been pressed. We're going to stitch the tack points and the bottom, excuse me, bottom brass ring where it goes. I thought allergy season was over, but we seem to be into grasses now. Um, so you're going to go through, I guess, all the, just go through the formula for figuring everything out. You're not, you're, because my shade is straight with a trapezoid flare at the end for those permanent folds that you see on the stand, when the brass ring is stitched, it's going from the bottom of the straight part of the shade. And that where the brass rings are, that reflects your finished length of the shade from the top of the board to the finished length that the shade needs to be. The other thing that I talk about when I'm talking excuse me, when I'm talking about when I'm talking about that swoop is I calculate the swoop to be below the finished length. Because I'm doing an operable shade, I want to make sure that the client has full and straight coverage of their window. Whether or not they need it is up to them, but I would never want a client to pull down a relaxed Roman shade and have that bottom of that swoop hit the sill and then having like privacy issues or light issues or whatever coming in on those little triangles beside the swoop. So I always calculate the finished length to be where all the flat folds start. So that's where the brass rings are. That's where your weight bar ends up. And then the shade folds up flat above that. But because you've only got those two lift cords, you could have wider spans. You're going to get a natural dip in that shade. Okay. So this is still just doing the tack points.
There's a little blurb at the end about.
Yep. So the nice thing with the Relaxed Roman is that, I forget, I think I made my sample in the YouTube series fairly wide. I wanted to make a nice wide shade. And the nice thing is it's only two lift cords, so you've only got two rows, going up either side. And yes, the optional, I talk about this a lot. I will put a small dot of glue on the stitching for the hand tack on the letter tape. And when I do blackout shades, I will take whiteout, quick dry correction fluid. I will take that and put a dab down first. And if there are layers, if I can get underneath the thread with that little sponge of whiteout, I will try and dab it in there. And then before that whiteout dries, I come back in with my clear white glue and put a little bit, I try and mix a little bit of that white glue in there. And I don't know if it works. I'm hoping it does because I don't get light leaks, but I'm hoping, the purpose is so that the whiteout kind of penetrates the hole and the glue kind of mixes through it and covers. And my idea is that I'm creating more of an opaque glue that will block some of the light. If you just use glue, it's kind of like the Lucite hem grips where that can actually become a refractory of light, and you might actually get more visible light if you just use glue, especially if it's a clear glue, dries clear. So I've been doing that more and more on all of I don't necessarily do it on all of my shades. If it's just a light filtering shade, I don't necessarily go in with the whiteout, but I've actually, because it's kind of a habit now, I've been doing it on more and more, and I've been doing more blackout shades recently. So I just keep a little bottle of glue and a little bit of whiteout with me at all times when I'm doing the tack points. So after you've got your ladder tape on and your brass rings are on, then I come back in and I'm gonna stitch up the permanent folds at the bottom. And those have already been marked because you know what your trapezoid shape is. You know what that flare is. So you just follow it. And you can, I will say that in the sample that I had, I made the, I wanted to have two to three permanent folds in that bottom section, but I was using some remnant fabric. So I knew that it was not going to be three folds with 8 inches in between or whatever my spacing was going to be going up my shade. I didn't have that much, and I also felt like I didn't need that much bulk at the bottom of it. So I intentionally made the spacing in that trapezoid section to be shorter. So um, I may have put my sort of my tack points or tacked it up in either 5 or 6 inch increments. I think I sort of looked at the fabric too to see how I didn't want them to be too skimpy and I didn't want them to be too fat. So I think I went with somewhere between 5 and 6 inches in between those bottom tack points. I may have only had 15 inches of fabric to work with, and that might even been a stretch. I might have had less than that. So I was kind of working with what I had. I made those permanent fold, um, the amount of fabric in those permanent folds less than what my spacing is going up. And I will talk you through in the series, I sort of talk you through what happens when you do that. So I'm not going to do a spoiler alert now. We'll find out what happens. But just because you have 8 inch spacing going up your shade doesn't mean that you have to have 8 inches between those in that trapezoid area. Okay. So the way I use, you still need a weight bar, and I do the weight bar. It doesn't have to be a flat weight bar. In fact, I do it the same way that I've always done relaxed Romans with the sort of pre-made casing, the tube, and around, but it should still be a steel weight bar. I cut mine an inch narrower and I use the tube and you're only going to attach, so when you have the tube, you put it through and you're going to stitch the top of that fabric tube, or if you've covered it in lining, that's fine too. You can make a tube out of lining. You could even machine stitch down one side because that machine stitch side is what I would have sort of facing the bottom part of your rings, and that's what I would have. I would attach that and I just tack it. So I've got my brass rings down at the bottom where the ladder tape starts. I have the permanent folds are all tacked up by hand and they're just tacked with a machine. No, sorry, a machine, a thread, needle and thread. I tack up those permanent folds, and those all got knotted to right where the brass ring is as well. And now the weight bar is also going to get tacked sort of at the bottom of that brass ring at the same tack point. I'm going back around. And I think when I did the brass rings, actually when I did the permanent fold tacks, I left a needle and thread off of each side because I knew I was going to be coming back in on the next step to tack in this weight bar. So you can also combine this step, the weight bar. I suggest you watch the steps so that you know what to anticipate in the next step, and you can keep that needle and thread and then just catch in the same tack that you've done your permanent folds. You can catch your fabric tube at the same time, stitch around it. And then because you probably still want a hem grip on it, I just put the hem grip, I flip it upside down and I just put it right on the weight bar, sort of upside down. Gravity will let it sit like that, and it can just kind of float wherever it wants to on that bar. It doesn't really matter where it's at. If you want to figure out a way to sort of position it and keep it from moving someplace, you could. It didn't bother me to have it floating because sometimes I feel like in a window, if there's a piece of furniture or something in front, the client may not always be able to get right to the center. And because it's a relaxed Roman, it's actually pretty easy to pull it down and push it up, and doesn't necessarily have to be pushed and pulled from the center. That's what I found with even the large 94-inch one that I had. I could be on one side and basically move it up and down. What you do want to make sure is that your weight bar is rigid enough and doesn't have any flex in it, because whatever flex it has in it is going to transfer to the horizontal strength of those cords coming up and down evenly. So whatever you use, make sure that it's rigid. And like I say, I would do a solid steel rod, or I would do a threaded rod, and I would make sure that it's not too thin in diameter, because the thinner you go, especially in the threaded, the more flex you get in the threaded rod, and you don't want any flex in that, because you want people, you don't want it to be like a bow and arrow thing where you've got flex in it. You want it to be rigid. Okay. So the next step is just, this is the same method that I use for my flat Romans, where I attach it to the shade. I've allowed 6 inches of extra fabric coming off the top of the shade. The ladder tape can terminate. I usually terminate my ladder tape going up just about an inch above where the finished length is and where my board is going to mount, so that the ladder tape doesn't have to go all the way up and around, but I do take it all the way up the entire length of the shade. And then I'll trim things back, and when I attach it to the board, a lot of times I will press in while it's on my table. I measure, double check the finished length. I will press down that top edge so that I get a nice crease, and I can put my board down, put the fabric on top of it. The only thing I need to do is cover the ends. So I take a little scrap piece of fabric and staple it around each end. Even if it's inside mount, I like to have that finished off. If this was going to be inside mount, you'd have to do some returns. So you would either do integrated returns, or you would do a return flap, little dog ear flap, which would be inserted as well. So you'll have to decide that as you're fabricating it. But by adding 6 inches of fabric to the top of your shade, you will have enough to cover the top, to cover the side, and then where the staples, I sort of have about an inch or half an inch to tuck back under. And I'm going to staple it to the narrow part of the board so that when the whole board flips back over to mount the widget, the staples are actually they're underneath the entire shade. You never see any of that. So it's a real clean look. If you haven't tried it, I suggest trying it. It's just faster for me to do that than to have a scrap piece of lining, or to try and, especially because these boards, these 1x2s, they're so narrow anyway, that if you're attaching another piece of lining on there, you end up with a ton of staples all the way around. So at least I find, or you have a raw edge on the top, which I never like anyway. So I just leave an extra 6 inches. So the next step, easy again, because you've only got two screw eyes, you're going to install your screw eyes in line with the ladder tapes, and that is standard for any shade style that you're doing. If you have an awl, it's real easy to do a little placement hole because you sometimes, well, you always need to punch through the fabric, so that is helpful. What I will say about the screw eyes is when you start working with multiple widgets on a board, saying so like in the top down, bottom up, or we're going to get into a day night shade next, where you've got multiple widgets doing different operations on your shade, the screw eyes should always be sort of aligned with the center of where the cord is coming out from the widget. So on a 1x2, it's easy because your screw eye is just going to be in the center of the board, but you want to look and see where the widget is positioned on your board and position your screw eyes so that they're in line with the cords coming out horizontally. So the center of the screw eye is aligned. Anytime you have sort of a bend, you make the cord sort of bend to go higher or lower to go through a screw eye, you're going to be creating tension. And it might be tension that you don't want on your shade, and you may or may not feel it when it's all said and done, but you also might. So as a rule of thumb, if you always just align your screw eye with your cords, then you won't have to worry about whether or not you put in extra added tension or a potential for cords to crisscross, which would also not be good. So installing the widget, and you're going to be threading the ladder tape. So with a 2-cord, I always place the 2 cords or the 4 cords in the center of the board. With a 3-cord, you're going to have to place it to one side or the other of center. But in a relaxed Roman, most of the time you're going to be doing either 2 or 4. So you just position that. You have 2 install screws for your widget, and you want to tighten them, but not too tight. You want the widget itself to have a slight wiggle in it. If you tighten those down too tight, you're going to be locking all of those gears. And when you get your widget and you look at it, you can see that there are 4 gears all connected. The 2 on the outside are your cord spools, and the 2 on the inside is your metal spring, and that sets the tension. There is no adjustment that you can make to that metal spring. We get that question fairly regularly as well. There is no adjustment. It's adjusted the way it's adjusted according to the specs that are on our spec sheet when you're ordering. So there is no adjust. You can't like loosen that metal spring or tighten that metal spring. The only thing you're doing with the install screws is you are either allowing those gears to freely move, or if the screws are too tight, you have essentially locked everything down. So having those screws tight is basically the same thing as having the pin in the widget. It's going to lock everything down. But I've never tried sort of, if I have to make an adjustment, I always put the pin back in. I've never really tried actually tightening those install screws so tight that none of the gears would move. I think it's just good it's a good practice to just know if you need to lock the gears, put the pin back in, but know that you do want, by having those screws too tight, you could also be locking the gears a little bit. And yeah, needless to say, all the stickers should be facing up. If you've inadvertently installed it so you don't see any stickers, you're not going to be able to have access to your pin. So you're going to thread the ladder tape. If you're not familiar with a ladder tape, it's just a piece of woven sort of trim that looks like a ladder. It has solid sections and then it has open sections. And I literally take the thread after your tack points are sewn down. I take the cord and I just literally weave it through over, under, over, under. If you get to a place where you can't go over under because you've got a tack point coming up, you can skip two of the solids and then just pick it up on the next one that you come to. Um, and
If
generally, what
if you
I,
ever wonder where you get a plastic needle, you should get one with every order.
yes, we send a little plastic threading needle, which is helpful, and just save them because I now am at the point where if I have a shade with four cords, I pull four of my needles out and I'll thread each one just so I don't have to keep moving one to the other to the other. But I usually just have my little stash there of needles to go. And from the top, I don't start threading the ladder tape when it's coming out of the screw eye. I count three solid sections up from the top tack. So the tack that's closest to the mounting board, I count three spaces up and I go under, over, under, and then I have my first tack. So I'm not weaving through the entire um, top portion, even though the ladder tape will run up and around my mount board. If you look at a shade that you've done, and once you turn your mount board perpendicular, you'll see that there's an angle there. So I don't want the shade being sucked to the center of where that screw eye is. So I'll let it kind of float a little, but I have to I have to catch the ladder tape enough so that that last tack point actually does what it's supposed to do and acts like, it folds it up there. So that's just something I do. You could play with that and, um, if you want to do a little more, you can. But I found that going through three sections at the top is generally enough. Okay. Oh, and then tying off. So we have it in bold here because the only thing we recommend at the bottom of your brass ring is to tie it off. And to tie it off with a hitch knot is sturdy. I end up doing a double hitch knot, I believe. I call it a double hitch knot because I do a hitch knot twice. And we do have tutorials, diagrams on our website. I would suggest it's kind of a very rough drawing, but I have it physically printed out and laminated on a little piece of paper. It's like in a sheet protector, actually. And I just have that tacked up to the bulletin board in my workroom because sometimes I just forget or I'm threading through and I'm going to be tying it off differently. I try and always tie it off so that it follows the diagram, but every once in a while you've got things that kind of interfere and you're like, I should really tie it off the other way because it'd be easier for me to get my fingers in there. So I just keep that there. I will tell you whenever and we still get the calls with people having shades that are uneven or other things, and we ask if they've tied off at the brass ring, and they will say no, they're using an orb. So, or they're using those the ring lock thing. The thing that comes with ring locks, whatever that's called at the bottom. We do not recommend either one of those. We did this week have a client who she admitted she got lazy and just didn't want to sort of get a refresher on the hitch knot. She was doing a sample shade, a flat Roman shade, just two cords, and she had threaded all the ladder tape, put an orb on each one. an orb that we supplied. It was one that she had in her stash. She even put a knot in the cord, and when she went to release the pin, the orbs malfunction, the cords sprung up, and the whole metal mechanism sprung out of its housing, basically. I mean, it was a complete malfunction, and she admits she just kind of got lazy and didn't want to sort of get a refresher on what that hitch knot actually looked like, and just grabbed the orbs and kind of regretted it. Because once that metal comes out of the spool that it's in, it's a little figure eight. There's no going back from that. You can't really, if a tab, in her case, one of the tabs busted off in the process, so it must have really kind of snapped up. I've never seen it happen, but I know it has to some of you. And so we've, for a lot of reasons, we just say tie it off, tie it off, tie it off. So I definitely suggest just print out that hitch knot diagram so you've got it and you don't have to worry about it. You can always go back and put the pin back in and make an adjustment to your knots. And I will always leave. You'll see that I have this 8 inches or so. I leave about 6 or 8 inches of cord. I've never really had to go back and use any of that, but if I had to sort of back a knot out, then I still have a good amount of cord to work with. I don't like to have cut ends on my shades, like visible cut ends on my shades of cords. So I would never sort of knot it off and then cut it off so tight to the knot that you couldn't go back and readjust something if you had to. It's just kind of an insurance policy for me. I've never had to use it, but I like knowing that I've got 6 or 8 inches in there for whatever reason. And what I end up doing with that extra 6 to 8 inches, I might trim it down a little bit smaller. I've tried it and everything's fine. I might tidy that up a little bit more. But in this case with the Relaxed Roman, I took my plastic needle and that excess cord and I punched through the fabric tubing of my weight bar, and I sort of basically threaded it through that tubing, and that's where it landed and that's where it sits. So you see the knot that goes around my brass ring, and essentially the other end just goes into my fabric tubing. You can feel it if you're operating the shade and you know it's in there, but I always try and hide that extra. So most shades will have a turned up hem, and that's where I'll sort of bury that extra length of cord is in the bottom hem. But in a Relaxed Roman, I really just had that fabric pocket, and I could just punch through, sort of create a hole with my plastic needle, thread it all through, and punch back out, and I sort of trimmed off if I had a little bit extra there. So then it's just pulling the pin. So you pull the pin, and I'd love it if you guys are making shades and you try filming this. It's actually, I've showed in a little YouTube, or not a YouTube, but on Insta, I showed a little video of me actually setting it up and pulling the pin. It's really easy to do. You don't need 2 people to do this. You can set your camera up, set your phone up, do it to record so that you see. Make it, if you're on social, you're going to want it in the vertical orientation. So just put it into a cradle. I have a little cradle that I use, and I have a rubber band that I actually will put it in a cradle, and I'll put a rubber band around my phone so that I can tilt my phone at an angle so that I'm not getting the lights and everything in my workroom, and I'm getting more of my table view. So in this case, the phone is kind of at eye level, but it's actually angled, so I've eliminated my fluorescent lights, and I can see most of my table. So you get a perspective on it. But it's easy to sort of stand beside it, hit the red button, go over to the front of your shade where you're going to pull the pin, and then you're going to do what I like to call the widget wiggle, which is just kind of, you just shake the shade a little bit and you'll see basically if you break the tension of the table to the shade, your shade will walk up to you. And it should. If it doesn't, it means that your install screws are set too tight. So you're going to want to maybe put the pin back in. I would put the pin back in. If I don't see my shade walking up, I would put the pin back in and then make an adjustment to those install screws. If you start adjusting them after you've pulled the pin, um, it may not walk up evenly if one was sort of looser than the other. I don't really know. I've never really had that problem, but I'm just trying to anticipate what could potentially happen if you didn't put the pin back in. But we say save your pin. I have a little container um, that I have marked with all my pins, so I know that's where they all land. Um, and I just have them there just in case. I know that there's a workroom that she likes to actually include the pin on her shade, but I would probably wouldn't do that for a couple different reasons. She thought it was better if the installer, because she didn't always go out on the installs, and she thought, well, maybe it's better if the installer has the pin available in case he needs to make an adjustment. Um, but what I would say with in terms of adjustments is that a lot of people still will ask and wonder why they can't use an or because they want to be able to make an adjustment on their shade leveling at install. And what I will say is that it's never a good practice to level your shade, which is square, off your table for a window that may not be square. I mean, that's never been a good practice. What you would do if you were buying a hard treatment and putting a hard treatment in a window that wasn't square is you would shim the shade so that it it takes up whatever adjustment there is. And honestly, I mean, I don't think a window would be so out of square that it would need any major adjustment of your chords. So I would never make my shade unlevel or, yeah, unlevel to match a window that wasn't square. Make, I would adjust the window frame so that it fit my square shape. So that's what we say.
With a
That's
shim, you're
another
not going to rebuild the
with
window.
a shim. Yeah, with a shim. And it could just be a washer. I mean, it's generally not going to be a whole lot. Um, I have little plastic shims that come with some of my products, and so sometimes I just order them, even though I know I'm not going to use them in a hard treatment, a blind or a shade. I will often order shims just so that I can have them on hand for other cases in case they come up. Because you're if I do shutters, I know if a window is square, but I'm not always checking for square if I'm measuring even for Roman shades. If I know it's an old house, then I'm going to sort of, take a couple measurements. And if your measurements are way off, you're going to know if your window is square or not. Um, but I would think, I know that back in the day, installers used to even just use a screw as an adjustment because they can put a screw in the top frame. If it's an inside mount, they can put a screw in and they can put it in at a different depth to level out so that the head rail, the mounting board, sits up against a screw that becomes the leveler for your frame. So that is a very old installer's trick from back in the day to make a square product. Comes off square off your table, should come off square from a manufacturer, And you don't want to be making your shade crooked for any reason. I wouldn't, once it's square, it's square. Okay, so say the pin, steam the folds and test. So you're always, the first couple times that you raise and lower the widget, it might be a little stiff. It might be a little awkward. I'm going to be posting a little video this week about sort of scooping a shade towards the glass and allowing the folds of the shade to fall forward. It's really important that when you're raising and lowering the shade that you sort of push towards the glass in a motion that sort of scoops under and not straight up or not at a diagonal from you to the top of the window. And you should instruct your clients also the proper way to scoop the shade up and down, so that it's successful for them. A Roman shade often, I mean, that's always been the complaint, is that Roman shades generally need dressing. They're not always going to go up and down. It depends on how much structure you put into your shade and how successfully and easily all of the more structure you have, the easier those folds are going to go up and down. But I always steam when I'm done. I will say with a relaxed, I'd steam it very gently. I don't steam it. I don't steam it as much as I might on something else because those folds, even though they're straight going up, they're still kind of relaxed. So they're not they're not totally straight. When they're hanging in the window, gravity is going to contribute to that sort of relaxed fold that you're going to get. So optional spacers. What you will see when you watch the YouTube video is that when I raised my hand sample, and I do have it back here, but when I raised it, because my permanent folds were smaller, they may have only come out at a 2.5 to 3 inch fold going back and forth. And I did 8-inch spacing on the top part of my shade. 8-inch spacing gave me a 4-inch fold coming down over the smaller permanent folds. So what happened is in my sample, when I was raising and lowering my sample with the smaller permanent folds, by the time I got up to like the second or third real fold on the finished length, I had lost the detail of that swoop. I had lost the trim. You could kind of still see the swoop, but I lost a lot of that edge trim detail that I really wanted to see. I talk about it in my sketch. It's a design detail. So what I ended up doing is I put in some clear PVC tubing as a spacer. And if you watch the video, you'll see there's just an addendum video in step 9 and you can do these spacers on any shade you want. If you want a cascading flat Roman shade, then I would say you put these PVC, you just cut clear 1/2-inch PVC tubing to whatever space dimension that you want. And when you're doing your ladder tape, you're putting it on like a bead. So the clear tubing is going to sort of circle your ladder tape and your cord at the same time. But because I'm doing this after the fact, I was not going to take this shade apart, but I would still wanted to see the little trim detail that I had. So I took the clear tubing and I just put a slit in it and I put it around manually while everything was in place. And I could play with whether or not I wanted 1-inch spacing, 3/4-inch spacing, 1/2-inch spacing. And I think I might have actually played with graduated spacing. So I wanted to get that bottom that first bottom swoop, I needed to lift it just a little bit higher. So I ended up using the half inch. Oh, and I think go back and watch the YouTube video. I think I used 1 inch, but I might have actually put two rows, or I thought about putting 2 rows of tubing in, and it would have been graduated spacing, so that just enough to lift those folds so that I could see the trim clearly when I was done. So I talk you through that. So that is a clear half-inch clear PVC tubing. It's purchased in the plumbing section at your hardware store. And it's good just to have it on hand. If you want that cascading look on a flat Roman shade, you can use it for that. You can use it anytime that you need. Some people, don't want the shade going all the way up to the widget. They want it to stop at a certain point. And I mean, the obvious question or the obvious answer is, if that's the case, you just stop raising your shade because it'll just stop wherever you want to stop it. But they really wanted, the designer, for whatever reason, wanted to make sure that the client never fully raised the shade. And so we said, well, then put in a 2 or 3 inch piece of clear tubing between your last tech point and the top of your shade. And that will act as a stop, basically. So if you haven't used tubing, I would say practice with it. See what it does, because you can create different effects, and it could solve maybe a problem that you think you have, and you think you maybe need to redo a shade. You might not need to. So that was back to the plan. So here in the picture, you can kind of see this is the shade now raised. If you watch the series, you'll see that when I initially raised everything, those real folds, I will say the real folds, not the permanent folds, came down lower than that bottom trim because I had a very shallow swoop in there. So this is where just on those two ends, I used the clear tubing and was able to sort of raise the stack of all those folds just enough so that I would always see that trim along that bottom edge. And there we are.
If
I
you
have
want to ask
16
questions or whatever,
questions.
just hit your
We have
unmute,
16
unmute
questions.
yourself. Go wild.
We're here.
The tubing that you're talking about, is it a rigid tubing?
It is. It's
No, no,
like,
no, no, no.
well,
I know what you're asking, Callie. It's a flexible tubing.
Is
It's
that,
clear
yeah,
yeah,
tubing. It comes in a spool,
yeah. Okay,
half inch. It's not the white PVC
yeah. It's
plumbing
not white
piping.
PVC tubing.
okay. And then,
Yeah.
let's see. Uh-oh. I don't know what I wrote right then. I can't read my writing. If we do an inside mount, relaxed Roman, I've always, I've not done them. I've discouraged people from doing them because the bottom corners of the window end up showing. Do
Yeah.
you just make yours because your finished length is where the real folds start? So
Yep.
yours just the swoop hangs below, or does it just sit in the windowsill?
I always do it so that the swoops always sit below the sill.
Okay, so it kind
Because,
of swings out a little bit when it's closed.
yeah. And then,
Okay,
it's kind of up to the client then. Like, they might stop it so it sits there, but at least they
yeah,
have the option of having the fabric all the way down.
yeah,
I mean, most of the time, these shades are sort of fix it and forget it, and you're rarely going to be operating them every day. Um,
right.
they're more pretty, I think, than
Then functional.
the function. Well, they are functional, but because it's relaxed too, so it just requires more dressing. But yeah, for
Yeah,
that reason, because I'm putting it on a widget where it I'm selling it as a functional shade, I want straight and clear coverage of
yeah,
fabric all the way down.
And I think
Because
you just have to have
why
that
would you?
discussion with your client, just
Yeah,
be aware, client, that,
yeah,
because you want a relaxed Roman, when you pull it down, you're going to have to decide, do I pull it all the way down so I have complete privacy, or do I just pull it down so that the bottom of the swoop touches the window because it's pretty?
Right.
I think the
It
point
really
is
depends on
I think
They
the
have a
point is
choice.
when you make it like that longer, then you don't even really have to tell them. They can just
They can
decide
decide,
where
yeah.
they want it to be. They have the option. I would just always hate to have given somebody a relaxed Roman and they were expecting full coverage and then
Yeah.
find out that
That's why I always end up telling them, I'm like, if you make it in right there, you're going to have those corners showing. Do you want that? And they're like, oh, no, we don't want that. So
yeah.
we end up going with a flat shade instead. But
Yeah, and that's why mine is like flat on top.
yeah,
I mean, it's flat going. The whole length of the shade is straight
yeah,
going all the way up for that reason. I've done one where I've done the whole trapezoid look all the way, and those are just kind of messier when they're all the way down and flat.
yeah,
And in my opinion, I mean, maybe it depends on your proportions, but the
yeah,
longer the shade, yeah, it's like it's just sloppier, I think, when it's down. My feeling is with the widget, you're making an easily functional shade, so it should always sort of first and foremost operate that way, and then however they want to use it. So,
yeah. No, I like that. The versatility of it. You can decide how you want
yeah,
to stop it.
yeah.
You talked about the pillowcase method, and I've not ever done that. Um, I'm so obsessed with my shades being square and the grain being right.
Yeah.
How do you keep, I guess I just have to be a little less obsessive if I do it with the pillowcase method.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to be off too much off
Okay.
grain. And actually, what I would say is that, like I used a half an inch flat trim. So you make it and you've got the nice 1 inch increment. So you've got a nice half-inch seam allowance. So everything sort of lines up on the machine and it lines up on your fabric when you've cut it. The proportions and everything just work. If you were to say, oh, I want like 3/4 inch trim or something different, your head's going to be spinning a little bit. But
Mhm.
if you stick to, the first time you do it, if you just sort of stick with easy increments, what I find is that when you do the turnbacks, because you're always going to lose a little bit when you turn and press, but you turn and press and you've got that stitch line is going to keep things also square for you. So
Okay.
if you've got a woodgy fabric, probably would be good because you've got a stabilizer in there.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I would, if you haven't done it, I haven't done a ton of them. But
Yeah,
having
I'll
done
have to make a sample because I haven't done one.
no, but
Okay.
having done this way, I'm kind of rethinking a lot of my shade fabrication.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would do it all the time, but I can see. I think in a relaxed Roman, it's like definitely
Yeah, because you're
beneficial.
definitely not putting ribs in it. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
When you were talking about the trapezoid section and you made the permanent folds and then you were stitching it, you're stitching the top permanent fold to the brass rings or just next to the brass rings. Can you explain that a little bit more?
I am I have so I've sort of accordion folded the permanent folds in my
Hmm.
hand and I'm just taking a bite out of each one to make sure I'm going through all the layers and I'm just doing a tack with all
Okay.
of that and then I'm taking that general tack. It gets quite bulky and it's going to want to turn back on itself. So I let it because I don't really care. It doesn't have to necessarily once you get the weight bar in, it'll kind of flatten back out. But I just do a tack in there and then I just take that same tack, same needle and thread, and I tack it to where I've tacked my brass ring.
Okay. Okay,
I'm
I
going
see.
around that like one or two more times,
Yeah.
knotting it in between. I'm
Making
like
sure it stays put. Yeah.
I'm pretty obsessive about it. Yeah, because also those in the relaxed Roman, because you end up putting the weight bar in there too, that that's going to take it's a lot of wear and tear and stress on there. So at
Yeah.
bare minimum, when you've done all those tacks, I would go back and glue that baby because
Okay.
um, Yeah, and you can kind of manipulate it so that it's not super bulky. You could use an upholstery weighted thread because honestly, you will going through, and I think I might have even talked about that. I think I went to an upholstery weighted thread to do the tacks on those permanent folds because you can take a bite through all of that. You will never ever see that thread from the front
Right.
because they're never flattening out. So, yeah, I think at that point I had switched. I just did my regular thread for all the tack points going up with the initial brass ring. And then when I did and I talk about that, I switched to an upholstery thread
Okay.
or the permanent one, cinched it all up. It's pretty fast. It's pretty easy. I mean, you'll see exactly what's happening.
And then how far inset from the sides did you put the ladder tape when you're doing the relaxed shade? Do you do the same as you do on a flat shade, the inch and a half in, or do you take it closer to the side?
Well, let me see. Um, yeah. So generally, yeah. What I did on this one, and what I always do when I do turn side hems, is I run the ladder tape right along the fold edge when I do a turn
Okay.
hem. And what I did on this one, where it was pillowcased, I ran it where the seam allowance was. So you've got a
Okay.
half an inch. I don't like it to
Okay.
be right on the edge, but then I had the half inch of trim. So I wanted to make sure that when I tacked, I could reach the face fabric with the tack,
Yeah.
but then the subsequent tacks, I only needed to catch the seam allowance fabric.
If you're trying to show it, we can't see it.
No, I
There.
wasn't really, but um, I don't know if it'll show up. Will it show up?
Yeah, you can see it there.
Yeah. Okay.
Silver just a little bit.
Okay. Those are my 16 questions. Thank you.
Good for you.
That was a fast
Paying
16.
attention. There's two more things. There's
Oh, I did have another question.
okay, we can go
Oh,
back.
go ahead.
Sorry. If I use ribs in my, this is like a flat shades, every shade kind of question. If I use ribs, can I go beyond those max widths in terms of what you say? Okay.
Totally,
Okay.
totally. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah,
yeah.
and
Using
it,
rib.
it's your call, how far you want to go and how far that rib will, maintain the
Yeah.
structure of the shape.
Okay.
And whether, and I would say, and whether or not you're putting, I think when you're putting a rib, which people rarely put the ribs at the tack points, if you put ribs at tack points, you could probably go quite wide because
Okay.
that's all of your stability, like
Hmm.
there.
For the fold.
But people, most of the time, people are putting the ribs in the folds. So you still have to see, like that'll help your fold
Right.
stay stable, but it's not necessarily if you're going to have sag between your tack points, the rib in the
Right.
fold is may or may not help you. That's
Okay.
where that is, we get that question a lot too. And that we can't answer that because we
Yeah.
don't have the fabrics. We don't know, what kind of
Yeah.
rib you're working with, where the rib is going. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because for this one that I've got out here, normally I would have just put two strings in it, but then the max width on the website was like for that width, I really need three. So I was like, okay, I'll get three. So now I'm putting three in it, but I also have ribs going in the back. So
But
I will
that's
say,
a flat Roman, right? Not a relaxed.
yeah, flat
but-
Roman.
Yeah.
and
So
I will say something to think about and maybe experiment with is, that buckram method that Susan
yeah,
has
I haven't tried
done
that yet.
before. And you could probably cut buckram, fusible buckram, you could probably even cut it down to like 2 inches and just put it at the tack points.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
would give you structure.
some
I
extra.
use that method in the hobbled shade. When I do that, I use a fusible buckram.
Okay. Yeah,
So
this one, I'm
yeah,
using that rib pocket
yeah.
thing. Yeah, I'm doing that. So it's on now and there's six, so we're doing all six the same.
That's what we're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, once you do it one way, it's just
That's
rinse
it.
and
Judy,
repeat.
do you want to plug your top down, bottom up?
So, yep, today is, if you've been following along, today the final video for our top-down, bottom-up series has published on YouTube. Thank you for watching if you have been watching. If you haven't, please go and watch. I would love for people to try it, do the hand sample. It's a nice, small hand sample, and I do ribs on that one, and I do the concealed hem grip on that one, and there was one other feature. It's black outlined, ribs, concealed grip, and I think there's one.
Did you do trim on it?
I did not do trim on it. Oh no, it's got a valance with returns. So I talk a little bit about that, whether or not the returns are on your valance or integrated. I touch a little bit on returns because it's an outside mount. Yeah, that's what it is. It's an outside mount shade, which I haven't done in any of the for the other videos. I just kind of talk about options or variations if you're doing an outside mount. But yeah, this one's an outside mount shade. It's a narrow shade. It uses ribs and um, concealed hem grip. So those steps, if you are just doing like a shade with a concealed hem grip, I think you can go to that specific step also and see it. Unfortunately, we don't do, I will say, with our series. Um, they are sort of raw. They aren't overly edited. You will find that I call a weight bar, a hem grip over and over until I sort of catch myself and change it up. If I'm saying something obviously wrong and I never get a chance to go back and correct myself, then I'll have it sort of edited with some text going across of what I actually meant to say and didn't say. But you'll see that I'm kind of a one and done when I'm doing the series. I don't have it in a bunch of steps. It's not a real slick, DIY produced show. I really just want to kind of give you guys um, what it looks like when I'm making a shade in my space. And I will say with the top down, bottom up, I do a lot more thinking. So it's unscripted. And I do a lot more on the spot thinking and contemplating and should I do this or should I do that? That comes up more in this top down, bottom up because you'll find that when you're doing that kind of shade and maybe even the shades that you're doing now, um, there are always more than one way to do something. And when you do it one way, it sort of affects another. And when you're working with a widget, you do kind of want to think through everything because you don't want to have to sort of go back and, take it back a few steps. So, so that's what I'll say about that. Thank you for watching those series. And we're going to be putting out more. I think the next one is going to be a day night shade coming out in September. And along with September, we will be at CWC in Erie, Pennsylvania. These are the dates. We're going to be there as a vendor, and we're going to be on the vendor floor showing. We're going to be showing the top. I'll be showing the top down, bottom up shade there. And we'll have samples. So we're going to be in the vendor space, and I will bring samples of the top down, bottom up that I have, maybe the relaxed Roman. We'll see. We kind of bring about 4 or 5 shades to have as samples. We will have an offer for some pre-order sales pickup at Erie, in Erie. So watch for that. And next month, our Widget Wednesday is going to be Wednesday, August 12th, and we're going to have what I'm calling a website open house. So we're going to, in the next couple weeks, we're going to be not redoing our website, we're going to be reorganizing the website. We sort of started the website when we started, with Centurion Roman Shade, the Widget 2.0. And we've just kind of built things as it's come up. And now we have enough in there that I want to go back and reorganize it so it makes a little more sense. So all the content is going to be there. It's going to be reorganized a little bit differently. We're going to let you know when we've finally got it sort of reorganized. You're still going to have your wholesale access page. You're still going to see the retail ordering up there. But it's basically all the other content. We do have a blog post in there, and some safety resources for printing stickers and things like that. So we've just kind of layered things as we've gone on for the past 2.5 years, and now it's time to sort of just reorganize things so
Tidy
that
it
it's
up.
tidy it up, make it easy to find things. So I'm going to kind of go in with my eyes, and see, like, if I'm looking for this stuff, I'm assuming that you're going to be looking for it too, and how it looks. So we're going to let you know when it's all tidied up. And then when we come to our next Widget Wednesday, that's also a Q&A. So bring your questions and answers. But we're going to have some trivia questions. They will probably be related to the website redesign, what you find there, where you find it, things like that. We'll give you fair warning that we've redesigned it so that you can come and visit it and check out what we have to offer. And then I'm hoping to have just some sort of fun trivia questions, and we'll have prizes along with the trivia. So basically just a summer social open house, and we hope you join us. You'll have to be present to win.
That's it.
And that's it.